So let's jump, Trevor, into our Miami preview. And so this is going to be kind of game ones of a 12 or show one of a 12 series bit we're going to do, where at the end of shows we're going to preview a Notre Dame opponent, because there's just so much that we want to get into this year that it's impossible to just kind of do these things as individual shows. So we're going to kind of put these in as part of, at the end of shows. And today I thought it'd be great to kick it off with our all opponent team, go all of our opponent team, and then go right into, now it's time to look at the schedule individually. And we're going to first preview the Notre Dame Miami game, which is going to be played on August 31st. That is a Sunday. It's going to be a night game, and it's going to pit what will likely be two top 25 teams, if not two top 10 teams, based on some people's preseason projections. But I'm confident in saying it's going to be two top 25 teams. And this is a big game for both teams. Obviously, for Notre Dame, it's a game where you're looking to kick your season off with a big win as you look to make another run for the national championship game. But for Miami, and our focus is going to be on looking at it from the Miami standpoint, just not looking at it from their standpoint, but just previewing Miami, not so much the matchup against Notre Dame, but just their team. This is a big year for Mario Cristobal. You're going into year 4 as a coach. You took a step forward as a program last year. You went 10-3. They go 11-2 if they don't pull Cam Ward at halftime of that game. You went 5-7 in year 1, 7-6 in year 2, and you took a nice little jump in year 3 to go 10-3. First 2 years, very disappointing. Last year, a much better season. But even within the improved success, you had a big win at Florida. There were not a lot of great wins last year outside of, 2 pretty good ones at Florida and at Louisville. The Louisville game was especially a really good win because Louisville was playing good football at the time. But, the win over Florida State didn't mean a whole lot. You beat a Duke team that won 9 games, but wasn't that great of a team. You needed to have a comeback to beat a mediocre Virginia Tech team at home. You needed a crazy comeback on the road to beat a very mediocre Cal team. You just didn't beat a lot of good teams. And then late in the year, Georgia Tech beat you again, and then you blew a big lead against Syracuse, which knocked you out of the playoff. So even within the improvement, there's still a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth about how their season went. And now you're going into year 4. It's time to say, okay, it's time to truly kick that door down and say the U is back. And that's the expectation. They're spending a lot of money on the roster. They've got some talented players coming back. The question is going to be, is Miami capable of doing that? But I do think that if you're Mario Cristobal, if you're not in playoff contention again in November, I think there's going to be some questions about where this program is going under him.
Yeah, he's definitely become, over the course of the offseason, definitely more of a polarizing coach for me because Miami's gaining a lot of hype and momentum. I don't know how much of that is because of what they did offensively last year. Because you go back and you look at some of the opponents they beat, the win at Florida was really impressive. It was early in the season. Florida, you could make the argument Florida didn't have its feet under them, but you still went into the swamp and you beat Florida, 41-17 or something. It was not close. Yeah, and then to beat Louisville, in a game where your defense gives up 45 points and you're still able to pull out a victory, it's also impressive. But then you have the Virginia Tech game, you have the Cal game. The Duke game was not as lopsided as what the final score indicated. So it was a lot of that for Miami. It was a lot of those games where, it was either too close to call at the end and, you had some help from some outside factors, call it. And then you also had some situations where it's like, I don't know if you guys should have won that game. Mm-hmm. Final score wasn't as indicative of how the game actually went down.
The Duke game is especially that because they ended up winning big, but it was they were losing for a chunk of that game to Duke. Mm-hmm. And Duke was a good football team, but if you're a team that's trying to win a championship, you can have a game like that. Heck, Michigan beat 8-5. Michigan beat Ohio State. 8-5 Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. You have those games, but for Miami, there's just too many of those games for them last season.
Yep.
But that's kind of how Notre Dame's year 3 went under Marcus Freeman, or year 2 went under Marcus Freeman. 10-3 record, but just kind of left a bad taste in your mouth because of the way you lost some games. And so can Miami take that next step as a program is the big question for Mario Cristobal. The one thing has to be true is I don't think you can take a step back. And that's the thing you have to avoid. And you have to, what we're going to find out this year was Miami's success last season built on Mario Cristobal growing the program, or was it because of just how good Cam Ward was? I tend to think it was because of how good Cam Ward was, but we're going to find that out. And look, I don't know what you think of Carson Beck, but him and Cam Ward are two very different players.
Yeah.
And Cam Ward is sort of the take a game over, do a lot of different things, where Carson Beck is not that. Carson Beck can be really good if what's around him is really good. He's not an elevator as a quarterback. And that's, people look at his numbers and they talk about this and that. And I'm like, look who he was throwing to. Oh, his run game was bad last year. Well, okay, his run game was pretty good the year before, and he had Brock Bowers and he had Ladd McConkey, and he put up pretty good numbers, but he wasn't an elevator. He was a guy that was getting the ball where he needed to get to. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's different than what Miami had last year. They had an elevator. They had a guy that made everyone around them better. They lose a lot from last year. This is going to be the true test of how good of a coach Mario Cristobal is. And you know, he's put a lot of blame on last year on the defense, and the defensive coordinator fired him after just 2 years. Now it's on you. You went out and made another hire coordinator, and we're going to see what he can do. Just diving a little bit into this series a little bit between Notre Dame and Miami. Notre Dame does hold a 17-8 17-8-1 all-time record against Miami. Miami won the most recent game, which was back in 2017, a 41-8 victory over the Irish. Notre Dame won 5 of the previous 6 matchups, and they beat Miami in 1988. Miami beat them in 1989. Notre Dame cost Miami a title in 88. Miami cost Notre Dame a title in 89. Notre Dame beat Miami in 1990, which also cost them a chance at a title. They did not play again for 20 years, and that was in the Sun Bowl in 2010, Brian Kelly's first season. Notre Dame won that game 33-17. Was not that close. It was 30-3 at one point in time. Michael Floyd just destroyed them. Harrison Smith destroyed them. Not a competitive game. Played again 2 years later, a game Notre Dame won 41-3 in Soldier Field. The Irish beat them in 2016, so that 4-8 year, that was one of the teams that Notre Dame beat. They had a big lead early. Miami came back. If you remember that fumble, C.J. Sanders fumbles the ball in the end zone. Miami recovers. And then I think it was Josh Adams had a big run late in that game to kind of get him back on top. I get that in the Virginia Tech game confused. I think it was the Miami game.
It was.
That Josh did that. And then, of course, Miami in 2017 just annihilated Notre Dame 41-8. So Notre Dame holds the all-time series in large part because they started off 1-1-1, and then from Notre Dame won, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 in a row up to 1980. Since 1981, Miami has won 7 and Notre Dame has won 6. So from 1980, Notre Dame has won 7, Miami's won 7. So the dominance is more of back of when Notre Dame was an elite program and Miami was kind of coming along. Miami started getting a lot better in the 80s. That's when Miami became the U. First started with Howard Schnellenberger, then Jimmy Johnson, and then Dennis Erickson, and so forth and so on. Notre Dame and Miami had a very intense rivalry in the 80s and into 1990. It's gone away for a while. The games that they've played recently have not either been one of the teams wasn't good, and only one of the 4 recent games is even close. And that was the year that Notre Dame won in a season where they went 4-8. This is going to be the first time in a long time, in my opinion, that both teams have had this much on the table. I don't know, like 2017, they were both ranked pretty high. I believe they were both in the top 10 in 2017, but Miami was a team that at that point in time had not really played anybody yet. They were a team that had a lot to prove at that point in time, and they ended up beating Notre Dame, which got a lot of people thinking they were going to be pretty good. I think they were 7th. Notre Dame was in the top 4, and then, of course, Miami goes out and I think loses their next 2 games. After beating Notre Dame. So, yeah, they went out and lost to Virginia. They beat Virginia next week and then beat Pitt the next game after that. So they won 1 game after that, then lost to Pitt, then got killed by Clemson, then got beat by Wisconsin in the bowl game. And up to that point in time, they hadn't beaten a ranked team all year till Notre Dame. Embarrassing game for Notre Dame, as we remember. Big win for Miami, and this is, you've got a chance to exercise some demons. Here's a crazy stat for you, Trevor. Notre Dame and Miami have played each other at Miami a grand total of, let me count this up. It has been, so they played 2017, 1989, 1987, 1985, 1983, 1981, and then 1977. Notre Dame has not beaten Miami in Miami since 1977. So this is obviously a big opportunity for both teams. And for Miami, this is the kind of game you can win to get your latest "we're back" moment. You beat the defending, national runners-up, a rival, first game of the year, new quarterback. This is the kind of tone-setting game that Miami needs to. It's that signature win that I don't think Mario Cristobal really has yet.
Agreed.
And that's what's at stake for Miami in this game.
Yeah, it's a big game, no doubt about it. Very rarely, well, I guess I can't say very rarely. Feels like for the second season in a row, Notre Dame is kicking off, their season with playoff implications kind of being in the balance the first time they step foot on the field to begin a season. But, it will weigh heavily. For Miami, this is going to come down to, hey, what marquee win are you going to get under your belt to help propel your season? Whoever comes away winning this game, they're going to use it as the foundation for their season. For Miami, it's like, look, I know we don't leave the state of Florida until the month of November, but we're gonna use this Notre Dame win to propel us forward. And for Notre Dame, it's, hey, we got to win on a Sunday night in Miami. We got the bye week to rest up. We host Texas A&M at home. We're able to go 2-0 through that stretch. Our season is starting to look real favorable as long as they can stay focused week over week. So it's a big matchup. It's a big matchup week one.
For Miami, if you can get that win, you've got Bethune-Cookman the next week. You've got South Florida the next week. You are a no-brainer top 10 team when Florida comes to town. So it is very much a season-defining opportunity for Miami. And as you get into your season expectations, it's not just about be 9-3 or better, but you've got to start getting some of those signature wins where you not only beat a rival, which they did. They beat both of their rivals last year. They beat Florida and Florida State last year, but neither of them were that good. Florida was, even by the end of the year, was a better team, but they were still an 8-5 football team. Florida State went 2-10. So you are going to need to prove that you get more of those marquee wins. I think the Louisville win was a very good win, but it's kind of like when Notre Dame beats Louisville, you're not going to get the national recognition that, like, nobody thought last year, like, okay, Notre Dame beat Louisville, they're back on track. Watch out, world. Notre Dame's going on a run. Like, we thought that, but nationally that wasn't the perception because it's not a name program. They need a win like this in order to really give Mario Cristobal the kind of boost that I think he wants to say, hey, look, we're back. Let's start getting some more people in here. So let's dive into, and I think that's the expectation for Miami this year. What's the expectation for Miami? Compete for an ACC championship, make a run to the playoffs. I don't think anybody should be expecting this Miami team to compete for a championship. They're not there yet. And there's a lot of things that Mario Cristobal still is looking to improve in the program. But I do think they're at the point now in year 4 that if you are that coach, year 4, with the money you're spending in the portal, should be that year where people should expect you to compete for the ACC title and then make a run to the playoff. I think that to me is what this team should be competing to do this season based on where they are in the program's development.
Yeah, it just summed up. They need to be in the conversation by Thanksgiving. In all 3 years of Mario Cristobal's tenure in Miami, they've just never been around it come Thanksgiving, unfortunately. I mean, they were even on the outside looking in this year because of the loss to Georgia Tech. And even then, before the loss to Georgia Tech, people were poking holes in some of the things that were going on. They were referencing the Cal game. They were referencing the
Virginia Tech game, right?
Exactly. And so be in the conversation in Thanksgiving. Don't be undefeated. You don't have to be, but give yourself a chance to fight for the ACC title because after Clemson,
that's what hurt them against Syracuse last year. Because if they don't lose that game, like if they don't lose to Syracuse, they're playing in the ACC title game.
Yeah.
And now you're competing for, we might have a shot to host, because when they went in to play Syracuse at that time, there were some questions about it, but they were still number 6 in the country. You win that game, win or lose the ACC title game, I think you're hosting.
Mm-hmm.
and then you lose that game. And that's the kind of losses that Mario Cristobal has had that have kind of derailed their seasons, where you're like, how did you lose that game? You know, you start off in 2023, they start off 4-0. They had that big win over Texas A&M, who was ranked at the time. And you know, their other wins weren't big, but that A&M win was giving them a lot of cachet. They were unranked when they beat A&M, and then they jumped up to 22, beat Bethune-Cookman, jump up to 20, beat Temple 41-7, and then you lose at home in bizarre fashion to Georgia Tech. If you remember that game, the not taking the knee, and it was just a bizarre game. And you got the next week and you lose at North Carolina. You think you right the ship because you beat Clemson, you beat Virginia, and then all of a sudden you get whooped at NC State, you get beat at Florida State in a competitive game. Like, their next two games were respectable losses, losing at undefeated Florida State by a touchdown, losing at home to number 10 Louisville by a touchdown. You blow out Boston College. You're sitting there and you're 7-5. You got a chance to get a win over Rutgers in a bowl game, and you're thinking, dude, if we go 8-5, you know, 3 of our losses are to top 15 teams. Carolina was ranked 12th when they beat us. Florida State was ranked 4th. Louisville was ranked 10th. You beat Clemson. You beat Texas A&M. You beat Rutgers in that bowl game, and all of a sudden there's some positive vibes going, and then they get beat by Rutgers. And like, that's the thing that's hurt Coach Cristobal is it just seems whenever they're on the verge of really turning the corner, they just have a bad loss or two that knocks them out. Last year was the same thing. Like, you're starting to roll. You know, because like, here's the thing is, you can criticize them for, and we talked about this, where, you know, Miami, they haven't really beat anybody that impressed you in 2024, but you still are thinking, hey, but you know what, Trev, they're finding ways to win. And isn't that part of program development? Is, okay, yeah, it wasn't pretty against Virginia Tech. It wasn't pretty against Cal, but past Miami teams lose both of those games. And that's where I felt like, okay, you're starting to turn the corner. But then you go and you beat Louisville on the road. And I'm thinking, okay, now they're rolling. You blow out Florida State. Yeah, the Duke game was ugly for a while, but you know what? Like, they found a way to win, and they win by 22. Like, that's what good teams do, Trev. That's the whole point. But then you go out there and you have that just ugly loss to Georgia Tech, and then you blow a huge lead to Syracuse and lose that game. Those are the things that Miami's got to stop doing. It's like what we talked about with Marcus Freeman going into last year at Notre Dame. You can't lose to Stanford. You can't lose to teams like Clemson, who wasn't that good. You can't lose to the Marshalls. We know you can go toe-to-toe with big top teams. We've seen you do that. But can you just avoid those what was that games? And that's what Miami's got to do this year under Mario Cristobal, is avoid those what in the world was that losses. That's going to be the key for them this season. If they can do that, then I do think they go into they have a shot to play for the ACC title. And if they play for the ACC title, if they're good enough to get that far, then I think they're good enough to beat anybody, including Clemson. Meaning, if they've played well enough to be there, then that tells me that they've maximized their talent. Some of the portal pickups were hits. Carson Beck is looking like he was in 2023. Your offensive line's big time. Your run game's big time. Your receivers have stepped up. You know, your defensive line's legit. They're not playing for the ACC title game if those things aren't true. You agree with that, Trev?
Probably, yeah.
Right. Otherwise, they're not there. So the point is, then if that's true, then you can beat a Clemson. I'm not saying I'm going to pick you to beat them, but you've got the talent to do so. I think that's what people are expecting from Miami this year, at least what they should be expecting from Miami this year, because, again, you're going into year 4, and resources are not your problem. Miami is more than willing to spend. And I'm not one of those people that whines about Miami buying players. That's the system. They're not breaking any rules, as far as I know. You can pay players now. They're using the resources they have. But when you do that, it's like what we talked about yesterday, Trevor. When you do that, people expect results.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And that's why Miami's become such a polarizing team. Just because you look at all the things that you just laid out, big picture, it's like this is the expectation for this team. My question is, and some other people's questions are, do they have the pieces for that? Maybe. But it's not going to look like what it did last year.
No.
That's going to be stuff that we'll dive into later. But
I don't care how it looks. If you're Miami, you just care that the results get there. And that's what's going to be interesting. So let's dive into more specifics about Miami, Trev, as we look in this. And we're going to begin with the offense. And you mentioned earlier, like, this is a reason why a lot of people are thinking that Miami is going to be a good football team, because last year Miami offensively was a dynamic football team. These are how Notre Dame's opponents fared last year. And as you can see, Miami had the not only Notre Dame's best opponent. This isn't the ranking amongst Notre Dame, opponents. This is just nationally number one scoring offense in college football, number one last season in yards per game, number three last season in passing yards per game, and then they were number 31 in rushing yards per game, which is a pretty respectable number for a team that was third in passing. Yep. And then they were also number one in yards per play. They were one of only two teams last year, along with Ole Miss, to be over 7 yards a play. You could count Ohio State if you round up. They were at 6.95, but they were just at 7 or above was Ole Miss and Miami. And the question is going to be, can you keep that going, or was that more of a Cam Ward infused results? Because if you look at 2023, they were a much different team, 31.5 points per game. That season, only 431.2 yards per game is still pretty good. 6.4 yards per play is still pretty solid, but they weren't anything like what they were last year. I don't think they're going to repeat last year's numbers, but you want to be closer to last year than what you were in 2023. And that's going to be the big challenge for Miami this year. To your point, Trev, it's going to be different. I think the way Miami is built, where their strengths are, where their areas of concern are, I think it's going to look a lot different. I don't think you're going to be a team that throws for 348 yards a game, but you could be a team that is much more effective running the ball. But the question is going to be, the first big question for Miami to me is, can the offense remain big time? Because if your defense improves, but your offense regresses, how much better are you as a team? And that's going to be the key. Can the offense maybe not score as much, not have as many yards, but can they be more efficient? Can they be more sound? I think there's room for them to be a touchdown less per game and, 60, 70 fewer yards per game, but be more efficient because they're limiting the turnovers. They're not so reliant on the big plays. They're controlling the clock better, which then protects the defense. I think those things are all aspects that are going to determine just how good the Miami offense is this year.
To me, it's going to come down to how Mario Cristobal handles Carson Beck. Some of the most successful seasons he's had as a head coach, Coach Cristobal has had a really good quarterback at the helm. At Oregon, he had Justin Herbert. Last year at Miami, he had Cam Ward, 2 top NFL caliber draft picks. Can you play to the strengths of your team? You do have you have a good offensive line unit. You have a good running back unit. Or are you going to make the mistake that Kirby Smart did at Georgia and be like, that's okay, we have Carson Beck. We can throw it 35 times a game. What is your identity going to be on offense? Are you going to lean into your strengths, or are you going to try to be the offense that you were last year with players that are not up to par as what they were in 2024? Mm-hmm. Carson Beck is not Cam Ward. Mm-hmm. CJ Daniels is not Xavier Restrepo. I'm sorry. So if you can play to the strengths of your team and give Carson Beck some run support, give him a run game to play behind, I think Miami's offense is going to be really good. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, you guys know I'm not high on Miami. I don't think I don't know. I don't have the faith in Coach Cristobal to do that. Or at least he hasn't shown me that he can. Now, mind you, argument on the opposite is the strength of the team last year was throwing the football, and that's what he leaned into.
But they built around what they were good at. And that's what I think makes Shannon Dawson a good coordinator. Is Shannon Dawson likes to throw the football, but Shannon Dawson is not someone who is like, we're going to throw the football no matter what. I think he'll lean into what makes them, like, what their strengths are. And to that point, this is what makes Miami such a different team last year. Because, yes, the yards were great. The yards per play were great, all those type of things. But Miami also had 16 turnovers last year in 13 games. Like you had, and the turnovers were bad. I mean, some of the turnovers against Cal were just like, dude, like I think he threw like one pick. It was a terrible pick, put him in a bad spot. You lose to Iowa State, turn the ball over 3 times. You have to get better at protecting the football. What was a big reason why Virginia Tech was in that game? They lost a turnover battle 3-1. Like, those are the things that we're talking about. You're going to be a different team. And I think Carson Beck, if healthy, could put up big passing numbers if they had the same team they had last year. They don't. It's not just about losing Cam Ward. You lost your entire receiving core from last year. You lost your number 1, your number 2, your number 3, your number 4, your number 5, your number 6 leading pass catchers last year. Your top returning pass catcher from a yard standpoint is Elijah Lofton, who had 9 catches for 150 yards. Your top returning pass catcher from a catches standpoint is your running back, Mark Fletcher, who had 10 catches for 106 yards. So to me, it's what are you good at? What are you strong at right now? And right now, Miami's strength is running the football. Last year, the run game was a complement to the pass game. The numbers were good still, 188 yards a game, 5.7 yards per play, and they didn't ask Cam Ward to run as much as he had at other places. It was more, his yards were more scrambling yards. And so, but you lose Damian Martinez, who had 1,000 yards rushing last year. You replace him with Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle, who last year combined for 1,007 yards and 13 touchdowns. So now you look at it and say, okay, what's the strength of this team? Last year was the quarterback and the wide receivers. The run game was a complement to the pass game. This year, I think you flip it. This year, I think the strength of your team needs to be the run game, and the pass game needs to complement it. Because you not only bring back Mark Fletcher, who was a former top recruit, if you remember correctly, was committed to Ohio State for a long time. Miami flipped him late in the process. I believe Jordan Lyle was also a one-time Ohio State commit. They're both talented young players. And they got Shamar Brown from who was a 1,000-yard rusher at North Dakota State last year. He's now there too. So you've got 3 good running backs, and you return the best right tackle in college football. You return Markel Belt left tackle, who's a big kid who rotated last year with Jalen Rivers. He had some good moments and some moments that weren't as strong. But he comes back. He's a year older. And now all of a sudden you look at your football team and you're saying, hey, look, we're a big offensive line for the most part. They got a couple guys. James Brockermeyer's like 295. But for the most part, they're a big offensive line. They are an experienced offensive line in certain spots. If they can get Cooper and Rodriguez kind of rolling. I know Cooper played a decent amount last year. They've got a shot to be a very physical, movement-based offensive line. They're going to need to get that going early in the season you don't want to ask Carson Beck to throw the ball 40 times a game when he's coming back from the injury he's coming back to. And we're going to talk about the receiving core in a second, Trevor. I think there's potential there. But you can't ask them to go into the first game of the year against one of the best secondaries in college football and say, okay, we're going to ask you, to your point, we're going to ask JoJo Trader to go be Xavier Restrepo or Isaiah Horton. We're going to ask, Ray Joseph to be Xavier Restrepo. I mean, you can't ask them to do that in the beginning of the year. They got to build to that, and that's where the run game is going to be so important. And if they can get that, you lost Jacoby George, who had 50 catches for over 700 yards. You lost Isaiah Horton to Bama, who had over 50 catches for 600 yards. You lost Elijah Arroyo, had over 35 catches for 590 yards. You lost Sam Brown, who had over 30 catches for 500 yards. There's some players there. CJ Daniels, solid player. I don't know that he's going to be much better than he was at LSU. Ray Joseph had a big spring game. JoJo Trader had a big spring game. They went to the portal, got a couple kids. Nikar comes back. I'm I'm high on Nikar. Malachi Toney, I think, had 100 yards in the spring game. But here's where it's at. Are you really going to want to ask those guys to be those type of players in game 1 against a team like Notre Dame, or even in game 4 against a team like Florida, without saying, no, we're going to be more run-oriented, and then we're going to grow the pass game as the season goes on? That's going to be the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And all encompassing. I mean, my biggest grief with Miami is the ifs. There's a lot that has to play out for them to reach what their potential is. And what we said their potential is being in the hunt to be in the playoff discussion, being in the conversation of, playing for the ACC championship. And I think that's what's so tough about the Miami situation is if they can lean more into the run and some of their offensive line continue to pan out, and if all of these very inexperienced wide receivers pan out, and if they don't have to ask Carson Beck to do too much, and if their defense plays better than what it was last year, then they're going to be good. And it's like, that is a bunch of ifs, man.
This is where you and I disagree a little bit on Miami, because everybody has ifs this time of the year. Everybody.
Agreed.
And the question is going to be, where are the ifs? That's what's the bigger question mark. I've always been someone who says, I don't care if there's a lot of ifs at receiver as far as lack of experience. Where I get concerned about lack of experience is quarterback and offensive line, because there's certain positions where, if you just look around college football, there are certain positions where youth can figure it out a lot easier. Receivers one where being young a receiver doesn't hurt teams as much as being young on the offensive line, or being young at quarterback, or having an injury at quarterback. Now, being young at running back doesn't matter as much. Like, I think you and I would say that if Notre Dame had to go into a game with Aeneas Williams, Kedron Young, and Nolan James playing running back behind that line, they're going to be fine. Now, if we were talking about, okay, they're going into a game and they've got Will Black and Gerby Lambert and, Owen Strebig as the starting offensive line, much bigger concern.
Sure.
And so that's the thing for me is, yeah, there's a lot of ifs, but that's just college football now. The question for Miami is, they don't have a track record yet of saying that they can lose that many players and reload at the position. That's the bigger question mark. But I think when you look at it, I think there is talent there. It's just, can they get it rolling? And that's why the run game is so important, because I think Miami's receiving corps is going to be fine eventually. The question is, can they do enough to protect it early in the season with the run game to give it the time it needs? Because if you're going to say, hey, we're going to put all this on Carson Beck's shoulders and all on JoJo Trader and Ray Joseph and Malachi Toney and C.J. Daniels' shoulders in game one against Notre Dame, I don't know how that's going to go. I'll feel a lot better about doing that in game 6 against Louisville, or even game 5 against Florida State. That's my question. I think everybody's got ifs right now. And in Miami's case, the good news for them is their ifs are at positions you're much more comfortable with there being ifs. Secondary, receiver, because those are positions where I think transitions can be made smoother. Where they don't have a lot of ifs, other than health, is the lines. And I think that's the difference between you and I you not having Miami ranked, and I do have Miami ranked. The question is going to be, are they good enough in the trenches to carry the day until the younger talented players at the skill position can step up? I think when young players get in trouble, Trev, is when you ask too much of them early on. That would be that's my fear with those ifs, is my big if you have to rely on those guys right away to beat a team like Notre Dame, then you might be in trouble. But you might be able to rely on them more to beat Pitt in November or Virginia Tech in November. That's what it is for me. And that's why it's so important that their offensive line does play, because it's not a given their offensive line is going to be elite. It's just got the potential to be so. And that's really the big question for me.
Sure. It's definitely fair to, like, all teams absolutely have ifs. And I'm also not saying that I think Miami's ifs are a bunch of bums either. I don't think that at all. I'm not saying that you are saying that I'm saying that. But where I have trouble, and this is partially because last season from them just left such a bad taste in my mouth, is at a lot of those positions you didn't have ifs, and you still didn't make the playoffs, and you still didn't make the ACC championship game, and you still fell apart in November. And so it's hard for me to picture that now this team potentially could go farther than what last year's team could be. That's where I have trouble, is because you lose all that production. And your secondary, you lost 4 players in the secondary that all played 150 snaps. I'm okay plugging in young players in the secondary or inexperienced players in the secondary if it's not the whole secondary.
Right.
Like I was okay with Leonard Moore stepping in because he was surrounded by Christian Gray and Xavier Watson and Don Schuler. But when you plug in 2 experienced corners and an experienced safety, that's when I tend to have more of the issues instead of
the corners they're playing, though, aren't in it. Well, we'll get to the defense in a little bit, but the corners they're putting in aren't inexperienced. They just haven't played at Miami.
Or together. Like that
Right. I
those
get
goes
that.
into my ifs.
I get that.
Like there's no chemistry, there's no
But that's true
like
for a lot of teams that they're going to play too. Sort of where I'm getting at. But I want to focus more on the Miami part. Let's finish up with their offense. The question is going to be is to your point is can they adjust? Can they go from a team that was so reliant on the pass, and then your run game is a complement, to a team that's going to rely more on the run game and your pass game's a complement? Not every coach can do that. I like Shannon Dawson. I think he's capable of doing that. But we're going to find that out. And then, of course, the biggest if of all is Carson Beck healthy?
Mhm.
That, like, I've always felt Carson Beck's overrated for someone like #1 draft pick. He's never been that. But he's not a bum. He's a good football player. There's no doubt. It's just he's not an elevator. And when you look at him at Georgia, it was you were part of a great system. You had great players around you. In 2023, you had Brock Bowers, you had Ladd McConkey, you had talent around you, had backs, you had an offensive line. 24, talent around him is not as good. And Georgia not only loses 2 games, but they had some scares against some pretty mediocre teams during the season as well. That's why I think it's so important also to get that ground game going, because as we saw as Notre Dame fans, when your quarterback, I don't care how good he was before, when he misses the entire offseason because of an injury, it's going to take time for him to really get on the same page with the guys around him.
Oh, absolutely. And another thing that's unsettling for me about Carson Beck is the digression from 23 to 24. I put a lot of weight on quarterback experience in big games, but for you to become less efficient, more turnover prone in your second year as a starter, look, people could say what they want about Cade Klubnik, but from 23 to 24, he improved as a quarterback. But with Carson Beck, it wasn't that. And that's what makes me nervous about him. That's what makes me nervous about him.
So when you look at the Miami offense, Trevor, we talked about that. It's a big test for Shannon Dawson to kind of get that unit going. The strengths of the team, I think we can point to these. I think these are pretty obvious. The strength of the Miami offense is their offensive line.
Yeah.
We talked about in our all-opponent show, we both have Francis Malinois as our first-team offensive line, right tackle. I think he's arguably the best right tackle in college football next year. This year, Tristan Bell steps in the left tackle. He was kind of in and out of the lineup last year with also Jalen Rivers. Both of them were a little banged up last season. You get James Brockermeyer in from TCU, which I think is a very underrated pickup. We talked about it again, also him on the all-opponent team, is he's not an elite talent. He's not a guy like a Francis Malinois who's going to be a first-round draft pick, but he's a very veteran player. He's been around the block a lot. He's got leadership traits. He's someone that can be a stabilizing force for a team that needs a stabilizing force with that offensive line. And you lost Zach Carpenter, who's a good player. Nes Cooper's a big kid with some talent. He's got to get a lot better than he was last year, but there's tools there. He's a 6'5", 6'6" kid. He's 350. He's going to have to get a little bit better conditioning, in my opinion. But if he can figure out a way to get that interior kind of comfortable and playing together, then this offensive line should be pretty good. And I think they're very good at running back. They lost Damian Martinez, but Mark Fletcher's a very good back. Jordan Lyles had a good freshman year. You get Jamar Brown in, that's without question the strength of this offense. It's in the trenches and at running back. And that's what Miami's going to have to build around this year at the beginning of the team. Biggest question marks for Miami, obviously, receiver. There's a lot of talent there, but it's a lot of unproven talent. That we agree on that. You've got JoJo Trader, who caught a touchdown pass in the bowl game. He's a rising sophomore, former top recruit. You got Ray Joseph, who had a very good spring game. He's been okay at Miami so far. The thing with Ray Joseph, what you have to ask yourself is, okay, is he maybe better than his, he was a highly ranked recruit that hasn't done a whole lot, but he's also been buried sitting behind Xavier Restrepo the last couple of years as well. Is he ready to take on a big role? He had a very good spring game performance in the spring. And JoJo had, obviously, we talked about last year, Malachi Toney's a true freshman, had over 100 yards in the spring game. He's a talented player. And then you also get Nikar back, who I was very high on coming out of high school, and then CJ Daniels. There's some talent there, but as we talked about, Trev, it's very unproven. Has it fit together? And this unit has had very little time with Carson Beck. And as we saw with Notre Dame last year, it took Notre Dame a good 5-6 games to even remotely get their offense on the same page from a pass game standpoint, because they had what? Young players that needed to step up, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and then a bunch of new transfers that hadn't played with Riley Leonard before, and he'd been out until the summer. Same thing with Carson Beck. And that's what Miami's going to have to work through at not just wide receiver, but also tight end, because they lost their top couple tight ends last year as well. And then the final question mark is, it's not whether or not Carson Beck is a good player or not. We could debate how good of a player, but he's a good player. It's the health, how healthy he's going to be. It was a bad injury. It was late in the year. Sometimes with injuries, it's timing. Because of how late it was, he had to miss all spring. He's now getting back. How quickly can he get caught up to speed physically, but then also with the team? Those are going to be the big questions that Miami's going to have to answer. And how well they answer them is going to determine if this offense can remain good enough for them to compete for an ACC championship.
Totally. With the strength of their team being the offensive line and the running back room, I think it puts less emphasis on how good the receivers have to be. I'm not saying that they have to go be Xavier Restrepo and Isaiah Horton. I don't want to get that confused either. They don't have to repeat that production and still be good on the ground, right? So for me, we watched Notre Dame do it last year. You can get through games. Notre Dame didn't throw a passing touchdown until their 4th regular season game, and they ended up playing for the national championship. So if you can lean into that, then Miami's going to be in a good spot. But you do have to have your receivers contribute at some point. And when that's going to be, it's why you need to lean on your run game to get you there at some point.
That's right. So that's the Miami offense, Trev. We're going to talk about the Miami defense next, but I think the final piece is that is having some continuity from a coaching standpoint will be important for this unit. Shannon Dawson comes back. You've got someone who's considered one of the better O-line coaches in the country. I think that's something that helps as well. At least on that side of the ball, there wasn't any major turnover. The important pieces came back. Your OC's back. Your O-line coach is back. I think that's important as well.